Thank you, Graham, for coming on. This is an exciting opportunity for me. And as someone who I don't have a huge following, this has been exciting for me. But the opportunity that I see is to learn quickly. I learn the best in conversations. That's pretty much why I have this podcast. And that's the reason I reach out to people like you to come on. Is you've got a lot of information, and this for me is an opportunity to get as much information from your head into this recording and into my head as possible. And yeah, hopefully we can do that efficiently. So my first question I wanted to ask is, were you always the Barefoot Sprinter? That's your Instagram. That's how I found you. Or did you become the Barefoot Sprinter? Or secret option 3 is you were born the Barefoot Sprinter, you lost it and found it again.
I think I guess that's the superhero journey in some sense. You're either Superman was always born Superman, but it's something like you're either born kind of a mutant and you have some weird thing that you go through. But no, I was born a regular human, just Graham Tuttle. That was my birth name. But it was kind of years in the making in some sense. I think you could break down my like fitness career, so to speak, in like 15 years, like 3-5 year sections over 15 years. The first 5 was just me stumbling around kind of as a kid, just figuring out what I wanted to do. I really liked lifting weights and running and doing that kind of stuff. And I always wanted to be athletic, but I didn't really know what I was doing. So then that kind of led to this bodybuilding style of training where I ended up getting injured far more often and started to accrue a lot of problems in my body, let's say that. Then there's the next 5 years where I started working as a professional and started coaching people and started learning, trying to figure out some of this stuff. And that slowly became a transition of, let me look down at my feet. Wow, they look kind of weird. And I didn't like the shoes. And so the first pair of shoes I ever got, they were like minimalist. I went on Amazon and got these. Like they used to have these. They're called they're Tesla shoes. Like they were like not associated with the company at all, but they were these cheap $25 pair of slippers basically that I could throw on there. But they would last no more than 2 months tops. I don't know what I would do to them, but I would get about 4 weeks in and start to wear on the bottom, and then by 8 weeks they had holes in them. So I'd put duct tape on them to get them to last twice as long. And I would go through 4 or 5 pairs a year, and eventually it was like, all right, you know what? So I went to Merrell's, and eventually I went to the 5-finger toe shoes. So I made the full jump. And at that point, I started to read the writing on the wall as a personal trainer. I was like, you know what? I need to do something else to increase my my income and my use, so to speak. And so I started doing more online things, and that's when I started to also serendipitously spend more time outside as the pandemic raged on. Gyms were shut down where I was living, and started spending more time outside. And part of it was running, and it felt really good to sprint. And there was a lot of turf fields nearby, so I was doing barefoot sprinting, and so I just kept doing that. And one of my friends basically was like, hey, that barefoot sprinting thing you do is pretty difficult. That would break my feet. So you ever thought of being the Barefoot Sprinter? And he kept calling me the Barefoot Sprinter. He's Australian, so the Barefoot Sprinter. And they kind of stuck. And then, at the time I was hanging down with Ben Patrick, the Knee Zero Toes guy, and realized how effective it is to have a pseudonym, because it sticks better than people don't remember Graham Tuttle, and they will. The Barefoot Sprinter just sticks. So, eventually I think you earn your title, your pseudonym, and so I became the Barefoot Sprinter. Yes. Option A.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's how I found you originally, just looking up in Google barefoot runner.
Yeah.
And you were one of the first to pop up. How conscious was that decision as a brand, or was it just sort of something that kind of came about naturally from your Australian buddy?
So, early on, so I don't know how common the other people experience, but when you start. So 2019, I was like, okay, well, I want to do something online. And so that it's funny now because you think, well, Instagram and TikTok weren't new back then, but they're still 5 years within. Like if they've been around for 10 years or 15 years or whatever, then it's, they were somewhat newer in terms of like how many people are doing that kind of stuff. Actually, I don't even know if I could say that, but it just felt to me like it was newer. So I started to post some stuff, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I took a few, like a business class, one of those, like, you see this little fitness business mastermind kind of things, and so one of them was like, you need to have a brand, you need to have like a niche. And so at first I was like, what do I do? What's something that's niche that I could do that would tell people? Because you have to have in your bio like I help busy moms age 35 to 45 earn money and make a living while losing 20 pounds. It's like there's always that. And I was like, well, what is mine? And so then I kind of had this idea of like 2X athlete training. So it's going to be 2X athlete was my first handle for a while because it was like, oh yeah, I'll help people. All you have to do is train twice a week. And it's not a bad idea because like if you're playing a sport or doing a bunch of stuff, if you could just get 2 workouts a week, then that's going to be focused. And so that was going to be my shtick, so to speak. And, eventually it didn't take long, and I realized I was kind of limiting, and just every time I'd have to tell people, "Oh, I'm 2X athlete," on it just didn't consider. What are you, twice the athlete? I don't know, what it was, but something. It was like, all right, I'm just gonna be Graham Tuttle, and so that was it for a while. And then once I started to get some followers, it wasn't the thing that you realize with social media is that thing. It wants you to be this kind of. It wants you to be this narrow. This is what you do. You only do barefoot stuff. That's it. That's the only thing. And so in some sense you have a brand, but I would say the most honest branding is the stuff that gets assigned to you in some capacity. Like I would post things and the things that would track or for whatever reason people would see this. And so it kind of becomes this mutual relationship where on one end I'm interested in doing something, and the other end people are also interested in it, and it kind of funnels down into a specific aspect. But I will say that the intentional part of it was the fact that I thought people would remember the name better. And I kind of realized like if I'm posting this stuff, it's really not about me. There was a time where you had to figure out like, all right, am I going to post and make things about me and myself, my personality and my life, or is this going to be the things that I think are like valuable? Of course, you blend in your personality with that, but it's like, will I make this valuable? And I have a blog and I have other things that I do that aren't related to exercise or running or being barefoot or sprinting. And but you realize you kind of have to separate those into something else because like when people are coming here, they're coming to see something or learn something in a focused domain.
What is the blog about? Just out of curiosity.
The blog is actually my favorite thing. It's a Substack. It's the Daily Sprint. So, which I named it that. My buddy gave me that name when I was writing 5 blogs a week, but now it's just twice a week because I'm working on a book. But the blog is my favorite because that's basically a public journal in some sense. So I went through periods. I journaled a lot as a kid, and then when I went through periods where I wasn't journaling, I realized like, man, I'm not as happy, and I don't, I kind of, I need something that gets my thoughts down. So I would get into journaling, and then about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, I was like, I was going to start writing a blog, and so I've got 300 and something down now, and it's just I love it. Like I about it's just a great way to get like 1,015 or 500 to 1,000 words, just some thought, and it helps organize the vocabulary of different topics you can pull from. But I don't really get the opportunity to talk about a lot of those as much because people want to more talk about fitness and health, but that's fine. But the blog is really the Daily Sprint. I love that. That's my baby.
Yeah,
which I have like no followers there. It's funny. I've got 300 something blogs there, and I've got 800 followers, which is like, but you don't do it because you don't do it for the numbers. That. Let me just say that would be an example of something where people. You see, oh, you've got all these followers, you do all these things, and it's like, oh, everything must be successful. It's like, well, no, like not everything is successful. Like there's just if you wouldn't be doing this, even if you had no followers, it's not really going to track. And so in some sense, it's like I have both the experience of doing something that tends to get a lot of traction with little effort, and something that I do a decent amount of effort and gets very little traction. But I do neither for the likes, so to speak. That is nice.
How much of a correlation have you noticed between like what you feel is valuable and then what gets traction on the internet?
That's a tough one because in some sense I will say I have a pretty good intuitive sense for this is going to do well. Meaning if there's an idea that I think is valuable, and often because most times the idea are either I'm explaining something to somebody and it clicks in a way like, oh, that works as an explanation, or it works for me, which is like, oh, that's I'll get these visual downloads of like, that's the real. And so I'll have this idea and I kind of get this visual, like, that's what it looks like. And so then I go and make that. And generally I know when I'm doing well, like recently, like I mentioned, I've got this bigger project I'm working on. And so that's been taking the lion's share of my focus. So I haven't really been putting a lot of energy into the reels, which it takes effort to like not relative. I'm not building walls and houses, but it's like it takes time and focus to sit down and make this like, all right, this is what you want to say. This is how you want to organize it. So I have a good sense for what things will do well, what tracks. But the thing that will throw me off is sometimes I'll make something that, and of course it's relative because you get like 500,000 views, and I'm like, I thought this can do better. But it's all relative in some sense. But there are times that I'll make something, I'm like, this is gonna be amazing. It's definitely gonna smack, and then it doesn't, and I'm like, okay, but that's where you can't run the counterfactual because maybe I buried the lead too much. Maybe I had too many other things. Maybe I talked too fast. Maybe the visuals wasn't lined up with the audio. Maybe there wasn't a good, clear definition. And it's like, so it's not always that the intuitive feel is wrong, but sometimes it doesn't take off as well as I think it will. And other times it's, and maybe there's another part, which is sometimes a message is only as sticky as it can be. Meaning, if I say, so I've made a few that have done really well with just basically like, oh, this is how you run. This is, it reaches more people. But I've made others that haven't done as well, but they've been more impactful for the right person. So, for example, one of my favorites that I made was talking about, there's a few, but one recently was with my dad, who's aged poorly with Parkinson's, and I made a post about how if your parents are aging, and as you age, you don't need to go to the gym, do a bunch of stuff. You just need to stay active. And so I had a video of my dad. He was like, "What workout should I do?" He always wants me to put like a workout plan together, like push-ups and bench press and stuff. I'm like, no. We need to do the stuff you need to be able to do in your life. So like getting stuff off the top shelf and putting it down, carrying boxes around, picking up a cat litter bag and putting it to your shoulder and squatting it. And so I loved that one. I thought it was great. And it got like 40,000 views, which is, again, for relatively speaking, it's not nothing, but to me that felt really valuable and really important. And that's like such a deep message, but it's not flashy, it's not catchy, and it doesn't have any of the sex appeal, so to speak, that would sell well. And it doesn't have the simplicity of a, just do this. It's like, so, but trade-offs, because it's like, it was for the right person, that message definitely connected, but there's not, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, there's probably not as big a market catering to that message as there are to just moving more naturally.
Well, there is the idea of like, there is a big market for it, but not a lot of people want to hear that. Like when you say a message that not a lot of, people will say this, no one's talking about this. It's like, yes, they are, because you are. Like let's be real. We're listening to, a podcast or on social media, and there's how many thousands of people liked this post. Like obviously people are talking about it, but it's a really catchy thing. No one's talking about this. So there's that whole thing, but the things that no one's talking about, no one's really talking about because they're not sexy and they're not fun, which is you will get older, you will die, your body will degenerate, and you will fall apart. And you can do a little bit of something to slow that down, but you can't prevent it. And life happens. There's some things that are unfortunate. And even if in a perfect situation, you wouldn't have things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. We have too many chemicals and problems and some genetic default in our system that it happens. It's not fun. It's not sexy. There's no fix for it. And it just is what it is. Now stop being lazy, stop eating junk food, and start moving. That's not a sexy message. Nobody wants that message. That's why no one's talking about it. The things that no one's talking about are really boring. They're really unfun. They involve sweat, sacrifice, and suffering. And that's not fun. That's not just do this workout and you'll be some better runner. It's like, that's what people like. Give me the romance. And so I'm pretty good at doing the romance. But I say as I've gotten older, I'm a little bit more, I'm less inclined to entertain people's fancies and more interested in how to make them really change.
And what do you think is behind that sort of change in your attitude? Do you think it's finding some success and then thus having a little more flexibility to kind of follow your gut rather than follow the results? Or do you think that's seeing people interact with your information over time?
A little bit of that. I would say a little bit of because the only reason I did social media was just as a marketing to get people into coaching. Like there was never any intention. When people call me influencers, like I don't feel that at all because I could care. I don't feel like I influence people. It's like I just want you to come and like make real change in your life and good. And so in some sense, I suppose that's influence. But so in some sense, it's like seeing the misconceptions people have and trying to steer them a little bit more. But I would say the other thing is I've always had a truth is a very core principle. Honesty is like a core value. That to me, it's like if I'm not going to be directly honest with you, then I'm not doing you a service. But I will say it's kind of like more so it's like a change in your gut microbiome. You know how people will they study the microbiome of people who are obese and it's totally jacked up, and people who are healthy, it's like a whole different species. As it's not that I wasn't listening to my gut, it's just that my gut has changed slowly as I've gotten healthier. So as a reflection of me as an individual, I mean, I've spent a lot of time and energy and effort doing coaching, working with a coach, both as like a personal side, everything from a therapist down to a development coach to men's work to like a business coaching, just for over the years, just continuing to do that. And you get better at understanding what the underlying impulses that drive you are. And this little thought, not about a year ago or something, where it's like a charming prince does not make a good king. And so in some senses, like, who do you want to become? Because it's like the little behaviors you have of like, I was very good, still am, at being charming, which is I can like reach in and fill the gap towards you. Like if I see you're sad, I'll fill your energy up. But like I can be in shapeshift. And a lot of that is like an anxious drive that you pick up as a kid. So I'm going to go ahead and feel where people are at and then just go and try and make them laugh or try to do something so that I know, even if it's self-deprecating humor, even if it's putting myself down. And I realized once you start to see some of those things, you realize, okay, I don't need to not to prostrate myself and doing. It wasn't. I never did something that was like uncomfortable, but it was just more of like there was a little bit more of I wanted the world to be this kind of like happy, pretty place. And sometimes it's like, that's why I really like the blog, because the blog, I just write very directly and I can do that. And I would say getting better at communicating what I'm trying to say and not needing to beat around the bush as much with vocabulary so I didn't hurt other people's feelings, those kind of things. So the small shifts, it's hard to say specifically, but I would say that would be the adjustment of growing older and realizing that some of these things in a relationship, for example, I got married once, the first time, happily married now. But the first time I was married was 21. So we were married for about 6 years. And I spent a lot of time in this kind of like boyish state where I wasn't really taking things seriously. There's a lot of frustrations because you end up acting in a way that isn't necessarily beneficial to you or the relationship as a whole. And it's detrimental in the fact that it doesn't build confidence, trust, or the deeper things that create a meaningful reliance or meaningful dependence, so to speak. And so I started to just notice some of those things, and then that shifted in terms of the, okay, you like maybe, and to your point, you get a little bit more successful, and you realize, okay, people like me for me, and it's like, okay, well, what is that? And I think that in that question, you can start to move a little bit more directly in towards what is the change I'm going to make in the world, and what is the thing that I really feel called towards speaking. So a lot of thoughts there. That's a good question. I've never really thought through that, but
yeah. Kind of to pick into one of the details there, you've kind of mentioned how you've developed a feel for what'll do well on social media, like a feel for the algorithm. Does that ever conflict with that value you mentioned of truth? Like, do you ever feel pulled by the algorithm to be less direct to the truth because of the results that you assume you'll generate?
Not necessarily. I'll say it this way, because truth, you can think of truth like concentric circles. So I say, this like the sky is blue is like, okay, well, it's true, but it depends on the perspective, because if you're in the sky, it doesn't feel blue. It just feels, like air, like the sky. And so in some sense, we use things that are technically not true, but useful all the time. And I'll say that was one of the things, I think, if there was one aspect that distinguished me, and again, there might be others, but if there's one aspect that I think distinguished me, is my ability to say things plainly, and not necessarily play without getting caught up in some of the technical nuance, because there's an impulse out of insecurity that people want to be science coaches, and they want to do the thing that's by the books with the right words and using the right terminology so that they impress the people in the back. But the reality is, the reality is that people just don't know what that means. And so they end up talking to a select crowd of people that then argues on the comment section. It's like, the people I talk to, the regular people that I work with, they don't understand this stuff. And when I do a lot of jujitsu now, and the metric I use is, how would I explain this to some guy who just walked up and said, "Hey man, my elbow hurts," after class? Is like, I get like 3 sentences before I've lost your attention. And so in some sense, it's like, is that not true? Well, it's maybe not the whole truth in some sense, but it's the core of it. So I kind of extracted it that you could say, you can tell stories. This is not my idea, but you can tell stories in 30 seconds, 3 minutes, 3 hours, 3 days. It's the same story, right? If I give you the elevator pitch, it's the same truth, the core truth, but it's just now we can add more detail and more nuance. And so the way I can if I can say something in 30 seconds that gets the point across to you and you get it, is that less true than me making you read a book that'll take you 3 days? Like, no. And so I think there's a level of, you have to figure out what is the way you could say this that is true, but not too, it's true in a way that makes sense to people. And that's not, I remember I had several friends I would make reels with, because that's one of the things I really love, is like going meeting people, figure out what their thing is. We make something that matches the message in the middle. And they would be very good, like technically, and they, this is my thing, and they want to. Their whole point is they're a physical therapist or they're a nutritionist or whatever, and they say things very specifically. It's like, okay, well, can we take that and then back it like 4 degrees off? So we're saying something, it's good to eat food. Protein's important. It's, like, okay, those are both true, and now it gets people in the right direction. Like, so that's the kind of thing. But I definitely feel, and maybe a better. So that would answer the question. One of the sidecar I think of, there are a lot of times where I want to say something that I realize is more for my ego than it is for the other person. So it's not that it's not true. It's just that the desire to dunk on people, I think, is very strong in some sense. And this is why I just don't check the comments, because people just say very rude things in the comments for whatever reason. But you want to get in these arguments where you want to slam dunk and say the final word. But every time I've noticed that there's a lot of times I'll say something that's a little bit harsh, a little bit more direct. Like, I made a reel recently about running on a treadmill. And it's like I say, running on a treadmill is making you a worse runner. It's like, I want to say that because I think that and I believe that. But at the same time, it's like, is running on a treadmill making you a worse runner? It's like, okay, that opens up discussion. And so really it is, when you're doing these, a lot of times you're making reels, you're thinking of yourself like a sniper. You're up in the terrace, no one can see you, and you shoot something and no one sees coming, you put it out there. But once you shoot that bullet, you can't get it back. And I think that's where a lot of people I've seen it many times where it kind of gets distasteful, where they're doing well and then they get, something, they kind of get a little bit of a big head, and then they start to say something that's like, if we had a conversation, I don't think that's A, how you feel, and B, what you would describe in a nuanced circumstance. And I think that's where people run into problems. So try to be mindful of that, because, it feels good to be, all up in your head and taking the sniper shot. But then once you realize that you shot the wrong target, you're like, and so trying to avoid those. That's the biggest thing that I have to be mindful of, is like, how do you not stick your foot in your mouth for being an idiot just because you got too egotistical?
I've thought about that too. Like, my sister just got married on Saturday, and there's all kinds of speeches, and I gave a speech, and I made my first speech, and it wasn't so much I was trying to dunk on people. It was kind of the opposite. Like, I made my speech, I read it back, and I realized I was guarding. Like, I was being defensive on the insecurities of my ego.
Do you feel like you were anticipating what they're going to say, and you're trying to like say things to kind of like, avoid that kind of sensation?
Yeah. Like, it's the things that I know I'm insecure about. I was coming up with preemptive defenses, even though no one was attacking me.
That's the self-deprecating thing. Some people all like default just get angry, or default could just get like mad at other people, like the bully. Other people will just say, well, I know I'm fat and whatever. It's like, that's what I started to realize in myself, and it just got better at staying in the middle. But how did you handle that?
Yeah, I by the end, I came up with a speech I was happy with, and I basically cut out any detail that wasn't related to the core message. I was trying to give a speech about how I'd seen my sister and her partner, now husband, Chris, intertwine their authenticities. And I made the first speech. It was supposed to be 4 minutes. The first version was 8 minutes, and I basically cut 4 minutes of defending my own ego to get down to the 4 minutes that mattered.
That's one that that's beautiful. I have this saying that I did come up with, but your genius is hidden by your inability, your unwillingness to edit. I think the editing is like the single most important thing that people could do, and it's obvious when you're writing, because I'll say during writing a book, like, it becomes painfully obvious when someone else has not put the work in to edit what they do. If you watch a reel, the single thing that people don't do that ruins their reels, like, if there's one thing I give people advice on how to make better reels, it's edit harsher, edit better, cut down everything that's not necessary, and only add in what it is. So if you become world class at one skill, it's editing. And people don't think about that, because the way you write is emblematic of the way you think. The way you think will give you insight to all different creative aspects. But from the reel to the video you shoot to the thing you write to the blog to article to book, you have to edit. And then what happens is as you get better at doing those in these slowed down repetitions, you get better at doing that in real-time action thinking. And you realize, I'm rambling on. This is off point, or this is about me, not them. Like, what's the point? And the better you get at saying, what's the point, you become a better and clearer speaker. That's huge. So your example of that is perfect because most people aren't willing to edit. They're not going to sit down. I got a speech. Well, you asked for a speech. What do you want to? No, I didn't want you to ramble for 8 minutes. I wanted you to share something. And it's like, can it be better? Could I make it 2 minutes? And like that kind of thing is always like, if you can, that is a superpower. So that's awesome, man. Because I think that's if you continue that skill, that'll take you further than anything else.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I didn't really realize you were a writer. I mean, I know obviously you're writing captions, and I've seen some of the stuff you've written, but just in this conversation, you're coming through identifying more as a writer than I realized. This you mentioned the big project. You mentioned the book is the big project that you're working on. The book.
Yeah.
What's the subject? Is it barefoot sprinting?
In some sense, it's like I'll say the thesis of the book is that sprinting is part of a handful of essential basic movements that people need to have access to. If you can't do that, sprint, run, jump, throw, roll, carry, climb. If you can't do those things, you don't have access to a healthy body. Not specifically because of survival, but in large part. But if you think about the way our bodies were crafted, they were designed with survival in mind. And before we think about offensive weapons like long distance running or math or conceptual aspects, it's like you need to be able to get off the ground, so to speak. And the way your body is structured, everything from your fascial network to your tendons, bones, ligaments, lymphatic system, circulatory, nervous system, is basically around this dynamic athletic movement. And so being athletic is not just an option, it's the essential aspect of what a healthy human is. And so I'm writing through, and the book is kind of similar to Supple Leopard in that kind of textbook category of like how to go through and do these things. But there's a process, introduction, a buy-in, a physiology section, then like how to connect with your body, how to move your muscles, how to how to create some of these games and movements back in your life, and then how to program them. So that's the setup of the book. It's really what I'm working on. I'm on month 4 right now, October, November. So yeah, I'm going on month 5 right now. I got about 3 more months until I finish the first draft. It's been the biggest project I've worked on. I've written books in the past, like PDFs for other programs. So I've done about 6 of those, and then a bunch of blogs, and so I've done a lot of writing to lead up to this. But it'll be about a 9-month project to finish the first draft, and then you layer in the video. Like I got some ideas for how I'm going to make it better, but then there's pictures and editing and going back through that stuff. So it's been the biggest single project I've worked on without any type of like release or there's a lot of other things you work on that you can kind of release in parts, like making proto products and stuff like that have been good, but there's like at most been a month or 2-month projects. But it really forces, these kind of long hauls they're tough, and they force you to get creative. But the thing I love about writing is that when you start writing, you don't know where you're going to end up. Like, I don't know how the book is going to end up because I'm still in the process. It's like when I don't know how a blog, I'll have an idea, and a lot of times I will be writing and I'm like, I don't know where I'm going or what this is. Like, I feel like I'm just kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and then somehow it just lands. It's like, I feel like a connection to the muse. It's not glorious and it doesn't catch a lot of attention. But if you look at people who are generally good at making creative or educational reels, they're also good at, I won't say all the time, because you can definitely just be attractive and be successful. So, but I mean, I'm saying the people that tend to make high quality reels are also deep thinkers, and people that are deep thinkers tend to always write as well, because writing is just clarified thought. So the more you think, the more you write, it gets your thoughts down and helps organize them. And the more you do that, the more organized your thinking becomes, and the more clearly you can see the world and express it through word.
Super cool. I identify primarily as a writer myself, even though I do a lot of things. I've made most of my money as a trainer the last few years. I like working with my hands, but the writing is when I feel the most me. And I just finished the first draft of my first book, which I'm hoping to release later this year. But I'm curious, what was your agenda in writing this book? Were you approached by someone who, well, like a publisher or something like that, or was it just you had so many ideas and it was just building up and you needed a longer, more cohesive way to tie it all together for people?
Well, I'll come back to that, but I want to hear what's yours. So you get your first draft done. What's the thesis of yours? Answer those same questions.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I always like when the guests turn it back. But it's a poetry book. So it started off as an album. I started writing songs and I made it into a full album. And at some point I realized that I didn't want to learn the music. Like I wasn't about the music for me. I tried learning to sing, I tried learning to rap. I've always felt like I couldn't execute the performance the way that I could execute the writing, and so I decided to change it into a book of poetry where I reformatted it, added visuals, and
What's
that's kind of
what's
where
the poetry? I mean,
it's
what
honestly.
inspires you?
So I kind of have a somewhat similar story for you in my early 20s. I was married at 19, divorced at 22, and in the first like 3 months of being divorced, I was separated. I was living at my boss's house in Tahoe. I would work 9 to 5, and then all day work with my boss, and then I just wanted some alone time. I would go down to the lake, and I would just write until it got dark every single day. And I'd always wanted to write lyrics and write in rhyme, but it wasn't until that phase of my life where I really like got through the hump where I could actually like it was no longer frustrating. It started being fun by the end of that period, and so I just kind of carried that over. It's not like I'm never like, oh, this is my writing block for the day. It's just always kind of just happens naturally when I'm going through something, or
Yeah.
I kind of just like catch a feeling, and then I'm like, I need to write so I understand what I'm actually feeling. And so I've written songs over the years, and I kind of took the most cohesive parts. The book's called Relative Momentum, and each chapter is like the way I've broken it up. It's running, hiding, waiting. Those are kind of like the negative momentum chapters, and then the positive momentum is waiting, pushing, pulling. So it's running, hiding, chasing, waiting, pushing, pulling.
That's beautiful. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. And I love that you have that kind of, I mean, the thing that people don't appreciate often is they'll hear someone like your story, and then, I don't know, for whatever reason, because now I know a little bit about how ghostwriters work, and it's pretty amazing how I used to think that all famous artists, I mean, you're now in Nashville, so that's not maybe that's not a coincidence, but I used to think that Taylor Swift writes all her songs or whatever. Kanye, it's like maybe some of them do, maybe the best do, I don't know, but you realize that like, oh, there's a whole team of ghostwriters that are behind writing these songs that Luke Bryan just goes and does. And it's like, oh, okay, interesting. And it's like, anyways, but the people don't they don't hear that part of the story, and then they'll hear you write some things that are famous, and 10 years from now you're living in a mansion in Nashville and you've got top five songs under your belt or whatever it is. But they don't hear that just like it just came from an outpouring of something, and like they don't see the things you do, the quiet projects. And so I think that's beautiful. I really love that. But I also think that like the expansion in the music, I just started about a month ago. I picked up the guitar and started learning to play that. So I just think you doing something musical like really forces your brain to work and your body to connect into like a deeper sense of reality. So I think that's beautiful. That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And so yeah, with your book, what was your agenda in writing it? Were you just writing it and then you're like, all right, I gotta try to sell this. I'm spending so much time on it. Or did someone come up to you and say, hey, I've got a proposition?
Well, fortunately, I had the company that did the Supple Leopard. They approached me about doing a book. This is at the beginning of last year, so like 13 months ago. And they said, we got on a call, and I was like, oh, this is the book I want to write. And I wrote this kind of like ethereal book. It was going to be about like spiritual stuff with movement, like all this, like this combination, this deep thoughts. And like, that sounds amazing, but it doesn't seem like it's what, up our alley of what we really want to focus on and what we think our strong strength is. I was like, oh, okay. And so I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll keep working on that. And, and then a few months went by, and I was sitting there thinking about my business, what I need to focus on. I realized, like, you know what? I pitched them the book that I want to be able to write in 10 years. Not the book I've earned to be able to write for the last 10 years. And so that's when I thought about, okay, what if I took the the programs, because everything I build is really kind of structured, and so I've got a set of programs to kind of work on this. How to get out of pain, how to learn how to run, how to get back to sprinting, like in the kind of this pyramid. And so I was like, I pitched them, well, this would be the book where how to do it, what it looks like, and then there were definitely they were like, yeah, this sounds really good. This sounds a lot better. And then as the talking, I had this like last minute. I was actually looking at the titles, potential titles, and just looking at a few. And I was like, one hit me, and I was like, all right, that's it. And so then I just switched and tweaked a few things to really make it specific. And then that started the project. And so that kind of with them was then, because I knew I had it when I just was able to sit down and just iron out the entire, because I had done a few different versions of the table of contents. And then there was one day where I just like, I got off this call with them, and it just boom, all 7 chapters, all the parts. I knew, right? It was just straight out, and I was like, "That's it." And then I sent them that, and because even though it's been a big project, like it's just, I'm treating it like one blog. It's like 70 blogs, but even then, it's chapter 4 is like 100 blogs. Well, no, I wouldn't say that. It's just 10 long blogs. So. But I treat each chapter like a book, and each section like its own chapter. And so each chapter has 10 sections. And so it's like 100 blogs, basically, or 70 blogs, which then I've already tuned myself to think about it like that, because I write so many blogs and so many things in the past. So in some sense, like everything kind of, when the time was right, the idea just presented itself. And I think that's one of the threads that I've noticed with making reels and stuff like that for short form, is when the time is right, the idea presents itself, and you can't really worry about ideas that haven't presented themselves. Like when the product is right, when the program is right, when something like it's there. And it took but that's the thing I think is, I guess, valuable from the story, is that it wasn't the first. I didn't hit it out in the first try, because I was in my ego of like, what do I want to write? What do I think is interesting? What will stretch me? But it's like, no. What have you earned to write? What have you practiced and said 1,000, 10,000 times over the last 10 years that you could actually really help people because you refined it? Like that. I always think the interesting, like the book you should write is the one that you've earned. And that's generally what you've been focused on and obsessed about the last 10 years. And so if you haven't been focused or obsessed about anything the last 10 years, you haven't earned a book. And so, but people don't, motivation and clarity is the reward. It's not something you get before you start. And so in some sense, the first idea I had is like, I didn't have clarity on it. And I think that came through in the pitch. But the second one I did, and that came through, but that was because the hard part is, another idea on this, but it's not sexy to you. Like you've said the thing 1,000 times. It's like, as a trainer, if you have spent any time working, you've answered, what's a macronutrient? What's a push-up? How do you've answered it 1,000 times. And so it's not interesting to you, but it's what other people need to hear, because it's what they keep coming to you to ask. And so the hard part is, this site like this Jacob's Ladder, where there's a cycle that goes up to heaven, and this kind of the spiral that continues to get ever more northward or up or vertical. And every time you go around in the circle, it's like get an idea to get inspired by. At the far end of that circle, you get way too complex, way in the weeds, and you come back in, and then your enlightenment, so to speak, is the simplicity you gain from that, right? And then but there's a friction point, because you think, all right, I got the simple thing, but it's like you think that you've come back to the start and it's the hero's journey. You've come back to the start, but you see the replaced for the first time, and then you're like, okay, well, what do I do now? Because I've got it. But then if you don't humble yourself to say, no, I don't have it, and then define some new thing, you don't go on the next loop. And so you can think of like a spring coil. You have to, the friction point, I think, maybe there's two different friction points. One is where you get too far into the weeds, you kind of lose sight of what you're doing. And the other is where you think you have it again and you don't think you need to look deeper. And so even though this has been, I have been amazed. There's stuff I've sat down and written over the last 2-3 months. Specifically this chapter that I'm working on, is like, there's stuff I have talked about. I've made reels for years. I talked to hundreds of people in, like, just over the thing, not an exaggeration, but thousands of people, whether via DMs or coaching calls or just input. And I'm still like, I'm coming up with things like, how did I not think of this before? Oh my gosh, because I'm looking so simple. Like, how do you stand? How do you breathe? How do you, like, I'm reading, and so it's like that humility to go back and continue to not think that you're at a higher level than you are and just ask the dumb question. And then it goes on another loop. And it's like, So I think if you just keep that, after you go on a few iterations, you start to realize, okay, there's a part where I'm going to get too in the weeds and too crazy, and I'll lose people, and I'll lose myself if I, get stuck on the science. Or, and then there's another part where I'll just think I've got it. I don't need to ask other questions, and that's when the ego gets in the way. So it's like that. I think if you kind of keep those as that piece, but that what I'm getting at in this ramble. And you're catching me on some good questions, which I haven't had a chance to edit and refine. So there's a lot of verbal processing. But that awareness is like, you can continue to spend a life going down a single pursuit. That if it's a deep enough game that can support that type of inquisition, that's a beautiful thing. And so the book, in some sense, wasn't the one that I thought I was interested in writing. But now that I'm writing it, I'm like, this is unbelievable. I can't, I'm learning new things about things that I've said for 10 years. And that there's almost no better reward than that. I think you see that with music, with jujitsu, with chess, with some of these other deep games. It's a definite blessing and a real privilege to be alive to play those.
For sure. I've noticed a similar pattern with myself with some of my writing projects where you're calling them deep games. I would call them like learning avenues. Learning, I'd say, is one of my core obsessions. Whatever
learning avenues. I like that. You walk down an avenue.
Yeah. But I whenever I'm working on a project, I get really excited about whatever I'm learning, whatever I'm studying, whatever I'm obsessing over. And I lose track of what I've already learned. And I tend to negate writing about the stuff I've already learned. And I'm always trying to write about the next thing. But whenever I do take the time to go back and write about what I've already learned, that's when I fill the gaps that I didn't even, like the blind spots I didn't even know were there.
Well, I think that's the value of a book in some senses. Like if you take a collection of all these things you've kind of, because I wrote a book about the feet and the hip. I wrote many 50,000 word books about these subjects, but then it's like people, I think you just nailed something that was valuable. Is if you don't do this, just, I don't want to say for fun, but just as part of your need to breathe, then you're never going to get the reps in and the groundwork to be able to have skill. People think, I want to write a book, so I'm just going to first word to the last word, I wrote a book. It's like, no, I don't know if it's an exaggeration, but at least hundreds of thousands of words, if not millions, like over the span of 10 years. Like, I don't think that's that crazy. And if you get in the habit of publishing that, I think if you don't have a Substack or a blog, I would highly recommend doing it, because something that's shippable and forces you to put it out it changes. It makes you sharpen up like a professional. But it's almost like you have to write a million words before anybody will read your first one. And nobody wants to think about that. And so if you're thinking about that, you'll never be successful. But if you're already a few 100,000 words in, because it's just this compulsion you have that you seem to have, it's like, all right. But I don't know how you coach that into people. Same thing, like you have to play a million notes before anyone will listen. There's something about that. I think it's like the 10,000 hour, but applied to like the actual individual variable, the metric. It's like another similar metric, but it's almost like if you think about, because it's a catch-22. People are like, how much I have to. If you're asking that question before you started, it's never going to happen. But if you ask that question halfway through, it's probably a good chance that you're on the far end of that circle. Like that. I don't know when's it gonna land, when's it gonna track. It's like, but you're already halfway there, and that's when you look back and say, oh, okay. And then you break through that, you get the clarity of, oh, this is what the simplicity looks like, and then that gives you your driving home, your intuition to drive home. And it's like, but it's like you almost have to do the first half alone. Some spark will get you started, and it's generally like as it was for me and for you, it seems, an emotional pain, something breaks, something that is just like, I just need to get this out, and that starts you. It's not like pain is the buy-in, and then, but you have to do the first half alone. And I think that's the hard part, is that like you can't coach somebody through the pain and the difficulty of that first half. You can say, yep, it's normal. That's the best thing you can do as a coach, is just, yep, that's normal, and keep doing it. And it's like, okay. But if you meet somebody that's not already on the journey, it's almost like there's no hope. Yeah, if they're young enough, but there's another, and just because I'm interested in this, There's another one of the blogs that is like, you don't want to find out, which is why the blog is so valuable, because like I've already mentioned like 10 of them that, you know, these ideas, like I'll have a word that I use, but it really means something to me because I wrote the blog to define it. Eventually you get like a Webster's dictionary of all these words, but it's the blog titles. And then like, this is what it means, but like in a real felt sense. And I've thought through that. But you don't want to find out, which is this idea of like, oh man, I just can't change my diet. I just can't lose the weight. It's like, I don't know what it's going to take. I remember I had a client that said this, and he was sitting there, he's struggling. I just don't know what it's going to take. He's a real sweetheart, great man, and he just struggled with the activation energy. And he's like, I just don't know what it's going to take for me to change. And I was like, you don't want to find out. You don't want to find out. Is it going to be your daughter dying, or like? And you don't want to find out how bad life has to be for you to change. So you can just do it ahead of time and say, it could get bad, and I'm going to do this anyways. But very few people are that self-starting, and I think that's I don't know, but it's that you don't want to find out. If there's a change you struggle to make, you don't want to find out what it's going to take for you to do it, and so you can just do it. Like that sits with me a lot. But
yeah, you almost had to go in blindly, you know, call
Yeah.
it beginner's luck or whatever. But it's you kind of had to. You're saying you got to get 50% of the way till you kind of know what you got to go
that's
through.
a rough number, obviously, but
yeah,
that's
and honestly, I
the
might argue it's 99%. You
it
know,
might be not. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
that's the thing is, okay. I'll maybe to square the difference there. I read this last week on the hard work up front. That was my my Monday blog. But the hard work up front is, you don't get clarity, you don't get motivation, you don't get any of those things until you've done the hard work up front. Like, you don't get blessed with a passion until you've already spent a lot of time stumbling around like an idiot. I'll say, I think you don't get that. It's 99% until you. So I think I would say 50% of the actual work there, like you've done 50% to get to the point where you're asking like, where am I at? And that's when you can like, you get hit with that. And then, but when you hit with that, you're 99% of the way there when you get hit with that clarity and inspiration, because once you have that, everything else feels like cake. It doesn't matter how much work, if you go, that's it, then you see what you're chasing. So like, even though, but the reality is, if you look at the timeline of like, oh yeah, I've done all this work, and then I got hit with, this is my style. You still are going to have hours and years of work to do, but it doesn't feel like that. Like that's the thing. When I got hit with the inspiration for the book, I'd only done, let's just say it's like 50% of the way there, like writing wise. I still have to go write the book and do this. And that's, hundreds of thousands of words that I will edit down to a refined bit. That's a ton of work. But it feels light because I have the inspiration. So I think for you, it's like you've done 99% of the way to get the inspiration, but 50% of the actual work. So somewhere in there, I think we could find that. But I love that, like the little collaboration.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. I love Supple Leopard. I love Rebuilding Milo.
Yeah.
The MoveNat book. I've got a lot of these books on my shelf over there. So
there you
I'm
go.
excited to check out
what
you're working on.
Have you read those, or how have you used those? Because that's what I'm really interested in. It's not just to write another one of those, but to build on that and to like actually make something that is meaningful. What do you like about that style of book? What have you struggled with that style of book?
What I struggle with is reading it straight through, pretty consistently. It's not super interesting. Every time I get one of those books, the first thing I do is I flip through the pages and I just look at pretty much every picture, and I stop and think about all the ones that I don't fully understand. I'll read the blurbs
Absolutely.
under them. Yeah, try to understand what they're showing in the picture, why they're showing it. But it's always hard to read them the same way I would read a book that's all just text.
Mm-hmm.
What I love about them though is the way that they're organized. That's something that always helps me. Since one thing I struggled with as a trainer, and I'm still struggling with it, is like understanding the gap where my client, like what are they missing that I see. Like I can see there's something off. What are they missing? And a lot of times introducing them to an idea in the book and then taking them like kind of backwards, like explaining it in the context of the chapter, explaining that chapter in the context of the table of contents, like that really helps me like get them all the way on the same page as me. And then the other thing I like is, since I've got a few of these books, and there's a few other ones that are more random, but I love looking at the same problem in different books. I've got someone, or I have a hip issue, I've got a client with a knee issue. I'll look at all the books and then kind of distill what I think are the most applicable takeaways for whatever the situation is.
Okay.
but I like having the books there for that.
Yeah. Well, so I have a very similar. I just read it. If you want to pick good picture book, Anatomy Trains, one of the best. It's arguably the most underrated book because I never hear people like you hear somebody will throw it in there, but if you look at the amount of reviews that something like Raising Milo or Supple Leopard has, it's crazy compared to like Anatomy Trains. It's on the 4th edition and he's worked 20 years on it and. It's only got like 100 or 200. And I'm like, Thomas Myers is a literal genius. Like it's sometimes it's hard to understand him, and he does not write in a way that makes that any easier. But the pictures in that book are unbelievable. It is so good, and the concept of Anatomy Trains is a lot of what I'm trying to write is to make that concept more applicable. Because all these books have been influences, but I sat down. It took me about 2 months to read that book straight through, and it just. On the next and the next, and it's like the word. And sometimes I learned words like phlegmatic. I didn't even know that was a real word. Like okay, all right, phlegmatic. But it was great. I ran out of words for it. But I look at those books, and I've seen a few, and especially Supple Leopard. And then there was I think that Jeff Nippard. I saw he's released a book or something about bodybuilding or something like that. I don't know. My buddy had it at the gym, and I'm just like. You open it up, you flip it through it. It's kind of boring. It's like, oh God, it's either too technical and scientific to the point like my brain just wants to go like that looking at it. And this is something I'm a professional in, so I'm supposed to, or whatever you want to call me, but it's like I'm supposed to know this stuff. But it's like, okay, now the challenge of this book has I'm writing at a 5th grade reading level or lower. Like that's the top primer. I have this little a Hemingway tool that if you see Hormozy uses it, which that has been the single best thing. I write a blog, put it in the Hemingway thing, tells me what the grade level is, and it's like, all right, go back and edit. And I've developed a voice where now it used to be I would write at like 9th or 10th grade level, and it was really complex. And now it's like 5th grade level is like this, 4th grade, anywhere from 3rd to 4th. Sometimes if it's too complex, it's 6th grade, but I edit it down simple, and you develop a voice over time of like very simple, small words, and people can understand it. So that's one thing, and the other is starting off and making it engaging. Like I'm talking to you. I'm not. The author says this. It's best if you do this. I'm not. You'll notice that people do this passive word. The ball was caught. The book was read. There's this passive word. It's like no. Read the book, catch the ball. Win the game. It's like that kind of thing. How do you learn to speak in an active tense where I'm talking to somebody? Can I use stories? Can I engage you? Can I hit emotion? Can I start to make these? Can I work in a way that's both organized and emotional, that's thematic, that gets you to go through the process where you understand what's happening and it makes sense in words you describe? I'm not talking about any muscles. I mean, I'm talking about muscles, but I don't like. I think I might mention the anterior and posterior tibialis just to describe them, the one in the front and the back of the shin. But there's the shin bone, the leg bone, is it your femur? Like I might mention a handful, but it's as minimal as possible. I'm not going to talk about the obturators at your hip. Like nobody cares. And the reality is that if you look at it, I don't want to educate you on something that ChatGPT could do in 5 seconds or that some textbook could show you. I want to show you how to really understand and move your body in a way that you would actually get and that you could communicate. If I can't talk to you in the words that you would use to talk to the person you're going to tell, it doesn't matter. And you won't learn. And that's the real challenge of the book it's not writing words. That's so easy. It's just to write words and write words that might be somewhat accurate. Like that's also not hard. It's write words that are useful and only the words that are useful. That's the real, that's what takes the longest time. But my goal is, and I'm also, the goal is to also film a video component too. So you could scan a QR code and like read through it while watching it and like have sessions you could go through and make it like real. Like, oh yeah, if your client has a knee issue, let's put this on and we could do it again. And you could watch it and have real exercises with real direction that is organized and structured in a way that makes sense, but not getting caught on the details. You're not losing the forest for the trees. That's the challenge of writing the book. But if I do it well, I want to be that book. My hope is that it'll be that book on the shelf that's like, that's the one that finally clicked. Because I've picked up, Kelly is unbelievably intelligent, unbelievably smart. And I look at I'm like, I can't even catch up with you. I listened to him on Huberman the other day, is a few weeks back, and I'm like, I'm tracking everything you're saying, but I spend my entire life thinking about this. It's like, this is, there are some people, just, you're so smart, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can communicate it in a way that normal people understand. Yeah. I'll give you one little story about that. I was down with Ben Patrick. Ironically, this is the same trip that I figured out that the Barefoot Sprinter was going to be a good name. We come out of the gym and we're going across the street to go get a steak at this little place for lunch right across the little avenue. And we walk out, I shut the door, and some Florida man walks out. He's grizzled, his skin has seen too much sun, and he's tattoos, and he's got this little bike. He's walking. He goes, "Y'all do personal training or CrossFit?" And in that moment, I realized that the entirety of what this man understood about fitness, everything in this man's world, was personal training or CrossFit. And that was the only two options he could think of. And I was like, that's the person that's the average American. Like, that was it. And I was like, okay, that's the person I have to think about. This Florida man down there. It's like, yeah. But people don't like that. I really do think that so much of what you see, and it's stuff on social media, is this kind of like, there's almost like a dislike and a hatred for the average person. And it's tough because sometimes the average person is lazy and doesn't do the best that they could. And that happens often. I used to, I'll continue on my ramble. I used to have this question of like, I'll ask you, do you think people are doing the best they can with what they have, or they just don't know better? Or do you think they're doing what they, what's the question? They're doing the best they can. They don't know, or they don't try. That was it. There's two versions of this question. That's why I messed them up. Do you think people are doing the best they can with what they have? It's like a yes or no. And, do you think people are doing the best they can with what they have? We'll start with that.
Yeah, but I might have to include a caveat later.
Okay. Then the next question is, if they're not doing, or the question is it that they don't know or they don't try? Like, that's the other thing. It's like, if they're not, if the question is they're not doing the best they can, is it because they don't know any better, or they're just not trying? What strikes you there?
I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the conversation with, like, you don't really know what you're getting yourself into until you're 50% of the way, or 99% of the way, or however you want to view it. Like, I think it's like I'm obsessed with this idea of uncertainty, which is unknown unknowns, right? And I think that it's so your question is to me asking, like, I think it gets into that unknown unknowns territory. Like, there's stuff that someone knows that they don't know. They, your Florida man buddy, maybe he wants to get fit, and he's like, I can either get a personal trainer or I can go to CrossFit. He doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't know that there's all these other things. And so there's that, and so it's not that he doesn't know how to get fit. It's just, once he decides he wants to get fit, and then he starts interacting with his knowledge base, which is personal training or CrossFit, then he starts uncovering, like, moving things from the unknown bucket to the known unknown bucket. And then those are blind spots you can fill intentionally, whereas the unknowns you kind of have to fill accidentally.
Think about it. Okay, now think about this in terms of a random walk down Walmart. You just see someone they're overweight and they're just in a cart. They don't really need to be in a handicap cart, but rolling around, and they're just, they're grabbing a soda and putting it in the cart. It's like, do they not know, or do they not care? I think that's the question. It's like, the average person, when you see someone that's doing something that's objectively just not helpful, it's like the question you always ask yourself is, do they not know, or do they not care? Like, I think that. So what do you think about that circumstance?
I'd say it's more they don't care, but it's not only that. I think that, someone who's loading up, I've done some Instacart here and there, and there's some orders where it's just 7 7-Ups and 7 Cokes, and that's it. And I'm just like...
but I think that tells you a lot about how someone answers the question, because I'll say that there's one of the biggest changes I went through in my life was going from a strict answer on they either don't know or they don't care, it's one or the other, to it's a little bit of both. That was hard for me because I don't like the uncertainty of that answer. I would say, okay. And I think you see this in people that have empathy for others go, well, they just don't know any better. Well, they murdered somebody, but if they had a different life, blah, blah, blah. And then people that are judgmental, say, well, they don't care. And it's interesting how someone can literally hold that exact same contradictory perspective for two different people based off of any number of unconscious biases. It's like, oh, the person that I like and I feel connected with, they just don't know. So I want to make them feel better and work with them. The person that I don't like for whatever reason, they don't care. They're just a dick. And it's like those two things. It's like, it's interesting because it's not that people choose one or the other. It's that they choose both, but they apply them selectively in different circumstances. But the person who can apply both at the same time to everybody, that's a ton of gray space. It takes a lot of intellectual power and emotional willpower and emotional empathy, and is very unsatisfactory because it's like, the reality is the person, they do know better. They do know that this probably isn't the best thing I could be doing for my body. Even if they don't know what it is, they know that it isn't. So there's a level of people just, they don't care. And so there is a level of, you do need to have more responsibility and try harder and do better. But there is a huge portion of it, an ocean of knowledge that you just don't know, that might make that ability to care better. And so that, I think, is always interesting, is like, do you not know or do you not care? And is the ability to remember that it's both, and that everyone's always in a circumstance. I like what you said, that the uncertainty, if people do not like that, because you will, if you actually take that lens, this would be something interesting for you to write about. But if you take the lens of uncertainty and just apply it to the fact that almost every action somebody does is done in a way to remove uncertainty. Whether that's to just delude themselves to the fact that this exists, I'm going to put my head in the sand, like there's no uncertainty, I know it all. Or just to just to remove uncertainty. There are so many things that are motivated. Like, you can almost understand somebody by, what uncertainty are you trying to remove from your life? Tells, if you back in, like, why did you do that? Well, what uncertainty are you trying to remove from your life? Like, that's a really interesting way to study people. I like that perspective.
There's also the element of like the degree of good or bad, which I think a lot of people kind of get stuck in these binary analysis patterns where they're like, it's bad to drink Coke. I know it's bad. I'm still gonna do it, but they might think, oh, it's also bad to eat dark chocolate, which in my opinion is not as bad.
Well, as bad is always relative. It's like, okay, well, how do you define bad? Okay, if you say bad is something that degrades the container, so Diet Coke is not healthy and it's degrading the container, therefore it's not. I think Peterson said the definition of moral is that which could be repeated. In some senses, like something that could be repeated ad infinitum, like forever, would be the most moral thing ever. And so, like, but in some capacity, there is, and so maybe this is complete conjecture. I'm just riffing off the top here, but maybe the idea of like heaven is you only do moral things because therefore they give you everlasting life. And you can imagine the Brian Johnson version. He's the guy that wants to live forever and spend millions of dollars jacking his health. That's the chase for the Holy Grail of like the fountain of youth is like, I only do things that are perfect for me, that do not cause damage, that will not destroy my body. Therefore, I am not sinning and I am living forever. Like, that's, in some sense, it's a weird way of thinking about it, but that is what people are trying to say. Just bad to drink that. It's like, well, you're hurting and then they come up with, you're harming your body. There's microplastics in there, and now you're polluting and you're creating this destroy. You see how people will try to like go all that, but it's their own. They're trying to remove uncertainty from their own life, but the degree of bad, say, okay, but that's when you start to look and say, well, what if this Coke is my reward for working hard this week, and it's the only thing that gets me going, and therefore, even if it does reduce my vessel by some small, tiny percentage, it helps me do the other things that increase my capacity. Therefore, it's outweighed. This small bad is outweighed by this major good. Some people would argue, there are very specific people that would, earlier philosophies would say that, like, there is no such thing as kind of good or kind of bad. There's only virtue. There's only good and bad. There is no gray space. And so I think it's interesting you see these things, but in some capacity of having an afternoon off to watch Netflix makes you feel like work more productive the next day than in some. And so I think that's that. If you go at life as though there is this option for immortality, I think the hard part about it is that there is no certainty in life other than, death and taxes, so to speak. But what motivates people to talk about health the way they do? It is a very heated thing. Not so much with exercise. You see a little bit of that, but definitely when it comes to nutrition, definitely when it comes to like, substances and alcohol and things like that. And anything that has to do with life, it's funny because that's what goes back to earlier. The only thing people are really not talking about is the unsexy thing of, yeah, you got to go sweat and you got to go work. I'm like, not fun. People are talking about it, but not in a very, very boring way of like, yep, got to do it. But there's a part where people only talk about the part that glorifies the ego, which is I'm going to get my bench press up and I want to go do all this stuff because it makes me feel good. But actually, you're probably not doing the thing you think you're doing because you're working out. It's kind of silly. Like, the still quiet movement of learning to be aware of how your body interacts and engages, and not just. I was listening. God, there's too many data points, too many threads here, but maybe we'll weave it together. I was at the track yesterday. I finished up my workout. I would do some dips and chin ups, and the ROTC club was there. It's like a military thing. And I'm walking by as I'm leaving, and the woman who's leading goes, "All right, we're gonna do this. You're gonna run down, you run back. Try to for your own sake, try to tire yourself out." I was like, "Try to tire yourself out. Is the point here to be tough or to get better at something? Because tiring myself out, I could hold my breath for 30 seconds and tire myself out. I can do anything. I can make it hard, but hard and tired are mental perceptions. It's not at all the thing. Am I trying to train a skill here? In which case, the goal is how effective did I do the thing, or am I just trying to be tired? And too many people just go to the gym thinking that, well, what are you trying to do here? Well, I just need to be tired. I need to feel like I did something today so I can go home and have my dark chocolate. It's like, that's the thing. It's like, that is what we talk about when we talk about training. All the stuff is like, can I go do this thing? How many reps and sets? It's like, what do you want? You want to be able to create this outcome. And not even that, you want to feel confident. You want to feel successful. So like so many things we do at the gym are just these kind of like ego massaging activities that beat our body up because we don't like ourselves, beat our body up so we can go eat something later because we don't like ourselves, or, beat our body up because we're stiff and painful from beating our body up and we don't like ourselves. We're massaging and beating everybody up. It's like all these things are layered on top. And it's like, what is it we're trying to actually do with this stuff? And what do we actually care about? And why is it that you can squat twice your body weight, but you can't sprint or jump? That's a problem. So we start to see this kind of weird, warped way we think about fitness. But all of that is driven by people who, in some sense, want to create this landscape where if I do the right stuff, I will not die. And I don't think you see that. There are people. I don't know how to like land this one yet, but it's like the nutrition thing. You definitely see. It's like, don't eat that. That's unhealthy. Do eat that because that's good. It's like, okay, so I eat liver and perfect foods for the rest of my life. Then what? You still die. It's like you might just live a little bit better, but it is encased in this idea of if I do the right stuff, I will not die. And I'll yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm following there. It's that song. It's getting old now. The Mr. Hudson and Jay-Z, Young Forever.
Forever Young. Yeah.
I thought about that when I was a kid. I remember seeing that, watching in the early YouTube days, and just watching Mr. Hudson. In the video, he's on the piano singing that chorus, and I remember it just struck me when I was younger. I was like, he's young. Like that video is gonna last forever. He's always gonna be 30 years old.
Yep.
Belting that out, and he just created a high quality moment when he recorded that song and then recorded the video that's gonna last forever. He can go home, he can drink as many Cokes, he can do as much of the other Coke as he wants, and he's still gonna live forever.
Well, in some sense, I do think that there is a chase of that. Like when you're young, you want to do something that makes a name so that you live forever, and you realize at some point that you're not going to live forever in this body, so I want to go make a mark in the world. And maybe that is through my bench press. Maybe that is through going to be the guy who ran 10,000 miles, whatever it is. Maybe it's just making a song. And so there is a level of that. And it's almost bittersweet because let's say you do get that. Well, now you did it. What do you do with the rest of your life? There's fighters that keep fighting past their prime. Brett Favre going back to the Vikings. It's like this. There's all kinds of examples of people like, I have that thing. And it's like, it's almost sad to get the thing because pursuing that thing is what brings your meaning to your life in a lot of ways. It's like having the work and having something to do. And I think that's there's twofold of that. One of which is you see people that try to avoid the ego death. And then there's a whole other set of people who just want to. All right, maybe this is how we weave it together. The first part of this like arc of your life where I'm going to go do something that's going to live forever. It's going to make a mark and people will remember me. Like that's just, so my life has meaning so I don't pass on into nothingness. Like there's that fear. But then there's a whole lot of people who don't do that, who do nothing with their life. And then they sit around and they kind of have this regret, the midlife crisis. And so that's when they start to get really focused on like moral ways and like what the food you eat. It's like, I just want to live forever. Like if I want to keep going, it's like, what have you done with your life that would otherwise require you to need to live longer? It's like you've not done anything that would challenge yourself. And I think there's a hard part of that. But then you start to see these outcomes of the person who does get that success. It's like they realize it's a drug that, wow, I did it. What else am I going to do? life is this constant battle of uncertainty, where I think that's why having a relationship and getting married and having kids is like, it forces you to take part in something bigger that's just not about you. And if you don't have that, it's yeah, I think that you end up getting in this stuck of like, the only joy you have is that you have Diet Cokes and other Coke. And it's like, you see these things. I would this is something I gotta write about it so I can like organize it in the head, like this idea of like uncertainty and living forever. And it's like, like there's something there, but you see how this is the work of like multiple blogs and multiple little pieces, like and it's like, but this is my close friends. I just sit and talk like this all the time about these things, and we go back and forth. It's like jujitsu, and you get better at a technique, and but it doesn't make for great. It makes for interesting listening, but if I were going on, if I were going to make a reel about this, like people needed to be thought through. They needed you to have done the thinking to help do this. It's
you got to close all the loops.
Yes, for people, so that like, what's the point, right? Yeah. They're going to sit there and listen. Like instead of going on a journey of listening and like, oh, well, how does this inspire my own thought? It's like, you just talk a lot. What's the point? It's like, I'm figuring it out as we go. It's like, but you don't get to do this unless you go and do a million words where you're just talking and rambling back and forth. But
for sure. All right, I'm curious. So you've mentioned 2 projects. One is the book you're currently working on, and then the other is the book that you initially proposed that you then decided is maybe a book for 10 years from now. I'm curious, just in the scope of this conversation, like what are the types of takeaways you would expect an average Joe that CrossFit or personal trainer Florida man? What are some takeaways from this book? And then what are some of the ideas? I'm guessing some of the things we're talking about would kind of be part of that second book.
Yeah.
But I just want to, where's the scope of each project?
So the scope for the first project is very clear. It's the idea of your body has wisdom, therefore your pain has meaning. So if you think of your body as not just a sack of meat that's like whatever, it's like, no, your pain has meaning. And so you can learn from the sensations of your body in order to organize yourself in a way that's not just productive and fruitful for you, but also productive and fruitful for the people in your community and your life around you. So if you do that by, so it gives you a reason and a rationale for what is important to do. Because if I say, I want to get fit, great. Now here's 15 million ways you could go and do that. It's like, okay, well, that's fine, but that's overwhelming because we think that having an a la carte fitness society where you could go and do whatever you want at any time of the day is beneficial. But it's like people don't do it because people would be more in shape if there was a government mandated, like, the people in the military, let me say this, people in the military are always in shape and they're fit at some point. Eventually they get hurt because they do dumb things. But what is that? Well, the Army PT test is very dumb. It's very simple. You run, you lift something, you throw something, you jump, and that's it. It's like you just push-ups and sit-ups, and there you go. But it's very simple and it gives someone direction. That's why people like running, because it's like, oh, I'm just going to go that direction. Like Forrest Gump likes running, So we don't do people a service when we give them a million options, even though we think we're doing them that, because it's just overwhelming. And then they end up kind of like whatever the first class pass they bought and they stuck with, and say, all right, it's better than nothing, right? But we think someone just because they're not fat means they're fit. It's like, no, if you could be of healthy weight, but your joints are destroyed and you're weak and you can't do anything. Like I know a ton of runners who are horribly out of shape, even though they look great and you have abs, just a 6-pack. They can't bend their knees. They can't do anything. They can't sprint. They can't walk barefoot. It's horrible. So the goal is to give people a real rationale for these are the important things that actually matter, not just, I really stay away from any type of, how do you measure yourself? It's no, there's a felt sense of, if I needed to, I could get out and sprint down the street, as fast as I need to for 50 or 100 meters, and that's arguably what you need to do. You don't need to be able to sprint forever or run forever. You just need to be able to, within eyesight, if I see some bad thing over there, I need to run away that far. That's what I need. Can I jump? Can I get over a fence and, a hip height fence? Could I like hop over that or do a little side kick around it? Could I roll on the ground if I fell? Could I get off the ground without my hands? Could I lift something up that's an awkward weight and get overhead? These are some of the basic things. Like, okay, before you go do a bunch of other stuff and really start the ego massaging, can you do these? That's the first basic introduction of like, these are the things that matter. This is how to do that. So once you have that baseline, then you're a healthy human and you can kind of stack everything else on top of that. That's the baseline of like this is what's important. This is how to do it. And so then there's a systematic way to like understand your body and see like, how do my joints feel? But rather than, your elbow needs to be able to go to, 104 degrees of extension. No, let's just start very simply with, this is your elbow. This is how it moves. And let your body feel and sort all these things out. Because we learned how to walk and crawl without thinking, without thoughts, without words. So our body knows what to do. We just have to get out of its way. So that's the big practical takeaway is like why it matters, what to do, how to do it. For the next book, what I would think, the idea was the idea of like principles of human function. So basically looking at, I had 3 body, mind, soul kind of thing. And the soul part was like these very deep principles, like truth, faith, hope, death. I had them listed. I have each section listed out, but it was like there's 10 principles. Principles like the things that are most underlying the foundational rock or something. But the deep principles of like a spiritual, philosophical way of understanding the world and like how to layer these things on. Then there was like the mental side, which is challenge, growth, uncertainty, kind of the similar things we talked about. It's like the mental models of how to really go through and then progress and work on these things. And then the physical one was movement, sleep, light, food, and it would be more of a discussion on kind of the broader sense of health. Like this book is all about movement. I do not talk about nutrition. I do not talk about sleep or light or talk about basically. You wake up tomorrow, what am I in this thing? What is the suit I'm in? Like, how am I focused and how can I really connect with this? But there's a whole layer of stuff. I mean, I've written a nutrition book and I've written stuff on a lot of like right now I have this weekly newsletter where I then read like a scientific article and kind of summarize like this is red light therapy. This is your gut microbiome. This a lot of vitamin D stuff for sunlight. Which is not vitamin D, it's the sunlight. That's just to be clear. It's not the vitamin D. It might be the vitamin D, but the vitamin D only helps if you have vitamin D issues. But those kind of things where I could see over years of doing that, you start to develop a really good sense for like, how do you explain why it's important to get sunlight? How do you explain, because the last year I spent reading, I read a book about water, electricity, physics. You start to understand these things because you can't understand sunlight if you don't understand electromagnetic radiation, which is the waves and all these things, how they interact with your body. And that is at some point I'll realize, and I'm probably on the back end of like starting to realize some of these big messages and to really make them clear, but you have to understand so much to be able to explain it in a simple way. And that will probably be years of working on and doing that kind of stuff to be able to do that. But the goal would be like basic principles, like not just here's your driver's manual how to use your body, but now that you can move and use your body, this is how you interact with some of these bigger things like the live forever, all the live forever things. Like let's go do those things. Like how do you organize because there's importance and meaning to them, but there's just not a lot of clarity because people take a piece of truth and run with it as opposed to actually, wrestling with an idea and letting something sit in the uncertainty, the gray space, as it were.
Gotcha. I want to dive into one detail of what you just said. It's something that I've been waiting for an opportunity to jump in ever since you mentioned the gut microbiome earlier in the conversation. It's so you just said wisdom of the body. That's you're teaching the wisdom of the body through movement in this first book. There's a book called Wisdom of the Body. Are you familiar with it? It's an old book.
No.
I highly recommend it.
Okay.
My backstory with this book is I started my own brand, which I called Fight and Flight Conditioning. I do jiu-jitsu as well. I've done some other martial arts, and I like running. So I've done long races and that, but I'm definitely a little better catered for the short stuff. But yeah, my whole idea was I'll build this brand, Fight and Flight Conditioning, and be a trainer through that brand. Then I went down the rabbit hole of the Fight and Flight was coined by this guy. I might be messing up his name. I think it's Walter Cannon, who is the author of this book, Wisdom of the Body. And he's also the person who coined the term homeostasis.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's a smart guy then.
Yeah, super smart. If you read that book, it's an old book. I'm pretty sure it's over 100 years old.
Really?
You I think just from some watching your content, I think you've got a better sense of anatomy than I do. So when I read that book, I read some stuff and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not right. Like there's definitely been a lot of information that counteracts what I'm reading here. But
I'm
so
pulling it up now, so I'll read some
yeah,
of about it. Okay, cool. I'll make a note for that later.
it's a cool book. It's all about the fluid systems of the
Yeah,
body.
that's something that I've really appreciated more so in the body. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, it's but I don't know. I guess what I want is your understanding of homeostasis and how um since we've talked a little bit about it, and the example you gave earlier of the microbiome, that was, I think, the clearest example to me. And what you said, and I might be butchering a little bit, but it was something like your gut health is at a certain level, and over time it's slowly changed to something else. And it's not like any given day,
Yeah.
like maybe there's some day where you drink a ton of Pepto, or for you get a stomach, you completely change your microbiome, but it's going to return pretty similar to that
Yeah.
homeostatic level that you were at before. But if you go to the scale over, I think you were talking about the 15-year scale of your
Yeah.
fitness journey. Like if you look at the beginning of the 15 years and the end of the 15 years, you're pretty different from where you began. Um, so I guess how do your training philosophies, like, how do they interact with homeostasis over time? How does your homeostatic state change over time when you're using the movement principles that you're talking about in this book?
I think so. This is an interesting way you could ground this. That Interstellar movie where he talks about, Matthew McConaughey jumps through the black hole and he goes through in the Tesseract, whatever, and he's like, it's love, it's love. It's like I never understood what that meant, but I think there's a level of something that grounds you, something that like David Deutsch has this idea of the multi-universe, the multiverses, and being like a crystal. So there's the things that are more true or represented on more of these multiverses, and so you start to see this as a crystal formation that forms because, if you have a, those drone formations where you imagine there's a million drones that are all flying in this kind of formation, they form this cloud. If more of the drones are green, then they'll look like a green cloud, so to speak. If they, but if they're all kind of muddled and different, it'll look, brown or uncertain. So I think that there's certain things like when you notice these deeper truths that ground you to something like a repeated metric in your life, something that brings you to a sense of, like that resonates with me. I think there's a level of that that you start to organize your life and the decisions around. And so the microbiome is interesting because there's trillions of cells in your gut, more cells than in your body. So the question, and we know these things, the gut has an impact on the brain. We know that what you eat impacts the gut, and whether you eat good food or like a healthy gut microbiome, it'll influence your cravings. And so most of the time, when we talk about free will, humans are not really that, because they're just responding to the decisions they made in the past. I think the closest thing you have to a free will for a human is the ability to change your environment for the future. And it might only be a tiny little thing. And I think free will is something you earn. In some sense, you start off in life and the food you eat, the milk your mother produces is affected by what she eats and how she manages her gut and her microbiome and her diet. And then you start to get fed, kids are just getting fed 7-Ups and stuff when they're a child. It's like that's throwing them in a different thing. And so in some sense, we kind of get thrown down this path that shapes our gut microbiome, which shapes our decisions and our impulses and all these different issues, all the different factors that play into life. And it seems like as we start to get some space from that, we have, and like we said earlier, it generally happens when something breaks in your life, that becomes the shock to your system, so to speak, where you don't eat. People that get stressed, they don't eat for a day or two or something like that. And so fasting has been shown to kind of like change your microbiome pretty dynamically. So something, you could have something traumatic. It could be a war, something that throws your life off. You have to move. You don't have food, whatever it is, something that throws off that. And like any major stress in your life can really derail you. And in some sense, that gives you a moment of clarity. And I think that's the point of a society, is that it gives you, even if you come off a poor start, you can look and say sports are an example of structured, organized team events where you have community, you have something that even if you don't want to do this, you're going to do it. It could be service. I think that's why a year of service is such a valuable thing for kids to do after they graduate high school. Before you do anything else, it's like it's not all about you. So go serve. Be in the military. If your kids that don't know what to do, they just go to the military, and it's like, okay, is it the best thing they could do? Probably, because it does give them structure. It gives them organization, and if you don't have the wherewithal and the space to think about yourself as an individual because your life has kind of shifted so far down this slide that you can't really change it, then you're probably not going to be able to change it. You probably don't have any free will, but you can end up in an institution, whether it's jail, whether it's the military, whether it's public school, I don't know, something that forces you to say, okay, overcome your impulses and see this thing. And if you can start to pick up on that lesson, you have a window, a crack in the window that lets you see, I could do something different. And that might be your first chance ever at having free will to say, if I do this different, if I don't go every day after school, I go hang out with my friends and I smoke weed. So then I end up, we end up doing whatever. It's like, but if I don't walk down that, if I just go to this alley and I join a sports team, ooh, that changes it. And so you see that one little decision opens up space to continue to build on that. And so you start to see this slight shift of a decision that changes the things you're put around, which changes the things you consume, the foods you eat, the thoughts, the ideas that you are faced with, that all factor in and change your microbiome and your overall system. And that little by little can shift the balance. And of course, it's tough at first and it's delicate, just like any other change is. But if you think about these things as you're giving your microbiome a chance to adjust, that changes the things that you desire. And so you end up, rather than desiring your short-term hits of dopamine and sugar and all these things, you start to desire the longer-term fulfillment. And that's not something that's obvious or an evolutionary thing. It just is something that only happens by chance. It's like the first monkey who figured out that they could do something that was fulfilling. There's like, that's interesting. I don't even know what this, they don't have a word for it. I don't even know what it is, but it's like, oh, fight, fruit, female, whatever these things are, that all the F words. It's like, oh, there's no fulfillment is a new F word that doesn't necessarily think about something. It's not just like I'm hitting my momentary need. So you start to see this change of yourself as this teenage animal into like the potential to be an adult. And I think that's because I don't think adult is a default state. I think everyone's a child by default. You're a person by default, but an adult is a role you step into, and you have the opportunity to do that. Otherwise, you can be a child and you get taken care of. And I think that challenge, though, is a good society should shepherd people down that road, even the avenue, as you said, even if they don't want to do it on their own accord, and give them some basic exposure to deep games and to things they could do. Sports are so valuable. Learning could be valuable. Music is very valuable for stuff. Romances can be powerful, but it gets derailed by early romance and these kind of like, which is really just our limbic system telling us to go reproduce. And so like, how do you get people to play a deep game before they get caught off by these limbic systems, like jealousy? And so in that sense, if you could see the underlying trillions of cells that are shaped by your environment, the only free will you have is ever so often when something breaks or you're forced to do it, you can shift the tide of that microbiome to change the future. And then over years of consistent effort, you can develop an ironclad microbiome that just gives you a new gut sense. When my gut says I do this or that. And so once you start to, at first, you don't really have a gut sense for what truth is because you don't really know how to resonate with anything. You don't know how to pay attention to the details and know if you don't know how to edit anything well. But over time, you start to get this real sense of like, that's it. That's true. That's valuable. This is what I want. And then you can iron and you connect to that in the field of potential, the ether of potential, literally, all the electromagnetic spaces. You can start to connect to things that resonate with you, literally. Like you start to see these words as having meaning. And that gives you a sense of a North Star, a magnetic north to follow. And that over time turns you into a person of character, someone of repute, someone that people could trust. When did it start? Well, when something broke or when I was forced to do it, I developed these things, but it's a continued choice to make sure that tomorrow's environment looks like it did today. And at some point, you might not know this, but you stumble forward, like you said, into the uncertainty. You don't know, but it's a small little, it's a fraught path that is never clear unless you're looking in hindsight. And that's where you start to grind, you start to calibrate on these deeper things like love and truth. And, it's love, Tars, it's love. Then you get like Matthew McConaughey screaming at your daughter through the Tesseract.
I like that. What are some I've heard you mention on other podcasts psilocybin and your use of
Mm,
it. You mentioned just in that your discourse there on microbiome fasting and how
yeah.
that can kind of be a more dramatic reset than the gradual progression over time. Um, what are some and you also mentioned how like sometimes it's something bad happens. Like sometimes there's an event that kind of shakes up your balance, and then that gives you an
Yeah.
opportunity to reassess. But like, what are some things that you can do intentionally or that you have done intentionally to I kind of think of it in terms of like levels of a video game or tax brackets. Like you're
To level
building
up.
up over
Yeah.
time, but then like at some point, like you get the build up gets to the point where it actually matters. You get to that next level. Like what are
Yeah.
some techniques or things you like to do to get to those level up
All
points?
right. And I got about 10 minutes, but I would absolutely do this again in the future. But so I think that it's interesting because if you can look back at the ancient spiritual traditions and start to see what I have in common. Well, fasting. Jesus went out for 40 days and fasted with, there's probably no food, and then next level is probably like no water. Like there's levels of fasting that are always there. Hard exercise, so things that get you sweating a lot. Sauna could be one. Cold exposure, whether it's temperature exposure, heat and cold. So sauna. This hard exercise. Um, Competition, I think, is one of the best ones. So when you think about hard exercise, we can break movement down into two categories. So far we've got fasting, which is just adjusting what you're eating or eating a very limited thing. There's temperature exposure, temperature extremes. Then there's movement, which I think you could do. There's toughness, and then there's competition. So there's toughness challenges, which are like integrity. Like my buddy James Pirat is the Wild Hut Conditioning. I'm going to go run for 500 miles. And it's like, you just go do these ultra marathons. People are like, can I go do this? It doesn't require skill. It doesn't require anything other than grit. You just got to keep doing it, which, some people like that. That's definitely a level up challenge because it forces you to have a conversation with the voice in your head. And I think, I ran track and cross country younger. I did rowing. And so I grew up in those suffering sports where it's like, you got to run 13 miles a day. You got to, it's like, it's what you do. I know that's not long, but like, I don't need to continue. Like, sure, because the problem with that is it goes to infinity. All right, you ran 13. Can you run 26? All right, can you do 50? Can you do 100? Yeah, I can run infinity miles. Like, there's a point where you realize, okay, what was the point here? Did I get the toughness message? That's the toughness thing. So there's movement for toughness and there's movement for skill, that's what I obsess over is, can you do things in a competitive setting? So jiu-jitsu, for example, and this is like signing up for a competition is a great container. From the day you sign up to the day you compete is a container, start and stop. And so you take it seriously, you focus, you dial in your game, you have a skill, you have to be able to develop under pressure. It doesn't matter how long, it doesn't matter how tough you are, how many times you get choked out, because if you lose in the first 2 minutes because you jumped into a stupid single leg takedown and stuck your head right in their armpit and you got guillotined, it's like, well, you weren't skilled. And so I think skill under pressure is another level, force you to level up, because it's not just about doing the thing, it's about owning the thing. Like I've been where I've still worked on a backflip for a while in gymnastics, and I'm still not super confident in it, but like I got to the point where I could do one. And you realize it's not just about like sloppily doing it, it's about owning it. And there's a level of like grace and beauty that's what I love and I care. Like, it's really, what is beautiful here? How can I make this beautiful and really own it? So there's that. I think mushrooms are phenomenal. I would be surprised. I need to do research. I wonder if they've done any research on the effect of the gut microbiome in mushrooms, because technically the mushroom is just a food poisoning reaction. The psilocybin gets in, but it's one of the only things that's been shown to regrow neural factor. The psilocybin chemical, which is interesting.
I know there's research on other mushrooms with the microbiome, the benefits like
It makes
chaga
sense.
and turkey tail, stuff like that.
I will say, when I first started taking mushrooms, and I've taken like a pretty decent trip 10 times ish, 8-10 times in my life, phenomenal, life changing. The first few times I took it, I'd have like really like bubble gut and diarrhea and stuff afterwards, and a few hours afterwards, like stomach aches and stuff. Not anymore now. And I wonder if that's a shift in my gut microbiome. That's that right there. That's a deep rabbit hole we could go down. And that's something I will have to do some more research, because it'd be fascinating if you only have bad trips when you are kind of in a wrong. If your gut microbiome is a bad spot, you're in a bad spot, and the mushrooms will awaken that and give you a chance to reset that.
That checks out with my experience.
Yeah.
I can tell you that much at least.
So that's the kind of thing that like you don't get to that point by just we spend an hour and a half just rambling around. Like that's a really good. You have to pull a bunch of things together. So mushrooms, I would say deep spiritual awakenings in some sense, but that's a broad category. And I think a lot of those spiritual awakenings could be any number of those things. And the spiritual is just anything that awakens the fact that you were meant for more. And I don't necessarily mean that laden to any specific religious aspect, but it's like, what is the spiritual? It awakens my spirit. To what? To the idea that I've been living for less than I could. Great. Doing the will to survive, like being in a tragic incident, a death of a loved one, you're in the middle of a caravan and going through the desert, it breaks down, you barely survive. Any number of these like life or death circumstances can be one of those, like, I want to live, like the will to live. When you really feel that and resonate with that, that does a lot. And then, yeah, I think on a lower level, like a breakup, losing a friend, those kind of like really difficult things, life breaking, those things kind of force you to realize that things aren't going well. So any of those things can be valuable. And I think, I don't know if we mentioned, we mentioned mushroom trips. And then I guess there's always room for like a spontaneous, like you're just walking down the road and have some spontaneous thing. Sometimes it happens to people, but it seems less often. But there's probably more. But those would be interesting. Like, how do you level up moments? Some of them you don't want to find out. Others you can do intentionally, and you're better off if you start to ease into that. The caveat I would say to that is, you got to know when you. It's the Ram Dass thing. Once you get the message, hang up the phone. Like that idea of, you don't just keep doing this. Like, oh, I'm going to go and try all the drugs and do all the things and keep going and taking more and more of the stuff because there's something more to find out. That's the elusive part that once you think, if I found out the answer, I'll have immortality kind of thing. There's the romantic lie about, like, I just got to a little bit more. I'll be happy when. And I think the point is, like, once you get the message, hang up the phone. The message of Roger Gracie, I think it's how you pronounce it, not Hodger, but one of those. I remember this conversation he had as a podcast. Is, would you rather be tough or good? If you're doing a toughness challenge, okay, good. Your first year of jiu-jitsu, you learn how to be tough. Good. Now stop trying to be tough and learn how to be good. And it's like, do you want to be skilled? Okay, then don't do things that don't get you where you want to go. Don't keep chasing. That's why, like, exercise, it's not clear. Maybe Diet Coke is not great for you, but it's like, neither is exercising until you can't bend your knees the next day, like, or 5 days. Be working yourself out to a knee replacement is not good for you. So, like, once you get the message, hang up the phone. Like that's the hard part.
I like that. That's as good a spot as any to end on. So on that message, I'll hang up the phone here. But I appreciate your time, Graham. This was really cool. And yeah, I didn't expect all these twists and turns, but that's part of why this is so fun for me. So thank you much. And yeah, stay doing what you're doing, since a lot of people like me are getting a lot of value from it.
I appreciate you. Thank you.